I know where there's some, right here in the hall, clerk.
No, Molly, not in there. I have enough.
One of these days.
Before we start changing out caps, I start changing out caps. A couple of things I always do to every radio that comes into my hands is I check, since this radio will run on AC or battery, I knew there had to be a power transformer, and it's right here. And most radios that you run across will have a audio transformer. This one does not. There isn't one on the chassis. There isn't one back here where the speaker is. And that's because this radio uses a push-pull transistorized output right here and this is a matched pair. Push-pull always has to have a matched pair, and a couple of diodes, and they drive the speaker directly. It's a 22 ohm speaker. So these guys are beefy enough to drive the 22 ohm speaker directly. There is no audio transformer in this radio. However, over here is our power transformer. So I'll take a moment and measure across each of these windings and see if I get some numbers. They don't put the numbers on this sheet. They might elsewhere. But let's see if I get some numbers that make some sense to me. And I'll do that next because it's right here and easy to get to. Then I'll change that cap. You might be asking, this is a transistorized modern radio, why are you changing capacitors? Well, it's not really. I mean, it is a transistorized radio. But is it modern? It was built in the 70s. I don't know if I can say the exact date of when it was built. Let's see. Probably not, but I know it was in the 70s. So the capacitors, the electrolytics in particular, are in here. Although they're of more modern design, they're still, 50 years old. So it's time for the electrolytics to be swapped out with some fresh ones. And it should be relatively painless to do. So I'll check the DC impedance, DC resistance rather, on this power transformer, and I'll get back to you. All right, I've pulled the circuit board out. It's a long, skinny circuit board with the 230 volt, 115 volt switch right there. But it's only held in with these 3 screws. Then I could pick this up, I could desolder the old electrolytic, put a new one in, and then measure the resistances for this power transformer, as well as the 2 powered, this is a full wave rectifier here. It's got a couple of diodes, or half wave rectifier, as well as the 2 diodes that rectify the AC voltage coming out of the secondary into DC, where it's smoothed by in this case, now a 470 microfarad capacitor right there. But I checked these resistances. They all seem normal to me. 1K on this side of the primary, 1K on that side of the primary, and then 8.8, 8.7 ohms on the from the center tap to the two ends of the secondary. So I think that's all fine. And I managed to clean this up a bit, so it's not quite so filthy. Look at this filthy in here. Why are old radios always filthy? Well, the GE107 wasn't bad. So anyway, I'll continue to clean a little bit in here and then move on to the other capacitors. Okay, I've managed to replace this capacitor right here. hot glued the new one in. The old one was glued in as well. But in the course of doing that, I managed to break both ends of the phenolic that holds this carbon rod antenna in place. I've glued it back together, but I need to get this off of here. So I'm going to have to, I didn't want to, but I'm going to have to desolder all of these lugs, put this in a safe place, and then I can work on this without fear of breaking it, because I've got to spend some time up in here too. There's tiny little capacitors, electrolytics up in there that need to be changed. This is apparently not bad to get into 3 or 4 screws, I can't remember, hold this bracket in right here, then you can get at them. What you have to be careful of, though, is leaning a soldering iron against this channel chart, this tuning chart, because it's plastic and it'll melt. I've not found a replacement for this wavy one just yet. Oh, sorry. So anyway, I've got capacitors up in here that need to be replaced. Won't be too bad because this replaces fairly easily, or this comes out fairly easily. What you do have to be careful of is leaning a soldering iron against this plastic dial chart, because it will melt, you'll damage it instantly. Also right here, this brass plate, or brass copper looking plate, right here is where there are 2 lamps inside here. And my suspicion is those were replaced with higher wattage lamps than they should have been. That's why this got all melted. So I need to pull that off. Once this is out, pull that off and take a look in there and see what kind of lamps are in there now. Because it shouldn't have done that. Should not have melted. Should not have got so hot it melted that. So I think the wrong lamps are in there. So that's my next task, is to take the antenna loose, and we'll go from there. Okay, I have all 4 of the electrolytics on this side done. Now I have to move to the hard part, which is the electrolytics down in here. And I feel like I can get the first 3. Let me get a lighter pointer. There's one here and here and here. And I think I can get those without hitting this. But there's one that ends right there. The terminator is right there, the end of the wire. And there's no way I'm going to get a soldering iron in there without touching this plastic. Which means I'm going to have to take this dial drum off. And I wouldn't have much trepidation about that, except for the fact that the dial string is working, and it's working just fine. But it rotates around the ends of the plates that hold this in place. I have to remove this plate to get the drum out. And in order to do that, I have to somehow anchor the dial string so that I can just stretch it back up over here, this end and this end, without having it come all in one, because I don't want to have to deal with that. I just don't want to. So I think what Miguel did, if I recall correctly, was take some modeling clay and shove in against this little pulley that's right there to anchor the pulley and the string, and maybe over here too. The string comes down right here and rubs against this screw, which is kind of odd, and then goes back through the bottom of this plate out to here. So I've got some modeling clay. I'll try that. I'll also try some blue tape, I think, which I've had good success with before. But I'll get started on that and I'll let you know how it went. I got the caps replaced behind the dial, and had to do it by taking this out. And one thing I figured out after much head scratching and false starts was that there are a couple of, there's a string that's round here, down here, back across, and back up. It's part of the frame of what holds the dial in place. And all it does is carry the needle. It carries the tuning indicator back and forth. It doesn't do anything else. It doesn't move. It's just a string that's suspended around there in a rectangle. So when you take this end plate off to get the dial out, you don't have to worry about that. You do have to worry about the string that goes right around here, right around this pulley, because that's a moving one. That's the one that carries the dial pointer back and forth. And all I had to do was tape it down to the top of this potentiometer with blue tape. Taped it down there, then I could release the string from the pulley on this side. The potentiometer is out of place because I'm moving on to the last two capacitors, which are under the switch plate, which the instructions say to pry up gently, and that's about as much prying as I can do without feeling like I'm going to break something. So we've got a small electrolytic right there and a larger one right there. This end is easy to access. This end is easy to access. The far end is not. But I'll do my best. So I'll replace these two capacitors and put this back in place, and this Zenith TransOceanic D7000Y will be recapped. Then we can proceed to see if it's going to work. So I'll catch you up when I get caught up myself. And one thing that I discovered while recapping back here that caught me by surprise is I'm so used to modern caps. I'm so used to old caps in the 30s and 40s and 50s being marked as the electrolytics being marked as positive and negative and so on. And our newer caps have this arrow that points to the negative lead always. But down in there were a couple that surprised me. Here's one. The arrow is the positive lead. So the arrow has a plus in it, and it's pointing to the positive lead. Right next to a cap, yeah, you can see it. The arrow is pointing to the negative lead like you would expect. So if you do one of these, be cautious. There are caps in there that will misdirect the polarity if you're not paying close attention. So beware of arrows that point to the positive lead of the electrolytic if you do one of these.
The makers of Johnson's Wax.